Well, howdy guys and gals, welcome back to the Social Regressive and part 10 in our optics series, how to select the perfect rifle scope for you. This one's going to be pretty quick today. We're just going to talk about dimensions and picking a scope that's going to work for your situation. We have a bunch of different options up here on the bench, and I'm going to point out why I've used some of these in different scenarios and how some of these might not be right for whatever your scenario is. Keep in mind again that all of this is purpose-based. Whatever rifle that you have, you probably have something in mind. If you don't, you should figure it out pretty quick. What it is that you want to actually hit at what distance, how fast that target is, if it is one that's mobile, if it is dangerous, and if there are many of them you want to keep an eye on, and or many of them that you want to address very quickly, and that will kind of change what size scope we're going to be dealing with here today. Alright, so first off, let's take a look at some of the extremes. We will start with something like, again, the US Optics TS20X. It's a big scope, 34mm tube, 50mm objective, big lenses, all kinds of features all over the place. This weighs quite a bit. And some of these scopes that get into your long-range precision sort of setup, like I said, they can actually weigh over 2 pounds. That's a lot of weight to be putting on a rifle. And that could be good or it could be bad. This is something that you need to kind of determine for yourself. If we have kind of a prone rifle set up like this one behind me, here I'll grab Telekinesis version 2. This guy right here is big, thick, heavy. And this is one that if I add more weight to it, it's only going to get better, at least as far as the actual shooting experience goes. The heavier that this rifle gets, the less that it's going to move under recoil. It's going to be easier to be more precise on target and not move it around very much. And actually when I take that shot, it's not going to move very much, and I might be able to actually see my impact. It's one of those things that you can do to one of your big heavy bench rifles to make it actually perform a little better. Turn it into a cannon. So this one does fit that bill pretty well. As you can imagine, if I were kind of hoofing this around, if I had to slap this on my back and go take it for a walk, or if I had to hold this in my hands, this one's going to tire me out a whole lot more than one of these little defensive carbines with a small scope. But since this is one that, out prairie dog hunting, yeah, we actually do walk around quite a bit more than the average guy. But I'm willing to deal with that weight because for me it's all about the shot. I don't mind kind of moving this from place to place. And the scope that's sitting on this is the Bushnell Match Pro 6-24 by 50mm. This one has some weight to it, but it does not in any way compare to the US Optics back there, or maybe some of your Schmittenbenders or Valdatas. This one is not bad at all. You can check out some of the weights that I'll put down here at the bottom. If, however, you have an offhand rifle like this one that you want to be very quick into position, you want to be able to get that snapshot when game suddenly appears, and you don't want to be tired if you have to take multiple shots afterward, then we do need to start looking towards something that gets on the lighter end of things. This is that Bushnell Forge, and this actually is designed to be a hunting scope. It's really designed especially, I think, for the Western hunters that have a little bit of a longer shot to take, and yeah, maybe they do have to kind of hump this out into the wilderness for a while and take that bit of extra weight with them. But when it comes time to take that one very precise shot, this is a scope that's going to be able to work at a variety of distances and make a very, very precise hit. On the lighter end of things, you're going to have your 3 to 9x40s like we've talked about here. These generally keep things very much on the light side. And some of the other ones that I can point out here on the bench, we have for squirrel rifles. This is one that I've actually used to shoot squirrel. This is a Simmons 4-power. This is a fixed pro target rimfire scope. This is actually just a really darn good scope. I'm going to talk more about this. I have a review that I put out in the past. I'll put a link to it. But this little guy weighs just about nothing. It has a beautiful image through this scope. You wouldn't believe what these fixed power scopes can do. With just about no tunneling, just a huge image overall, good light gathering capabilities, and it has a cool little turret up here that you can use to adjust for your drop at whatever distance your squirrel might end up being. Really just a nice little thing right here, and that is going to make something very mobile, especially for maybe a kid's gun. If you want to have a rifle that is set up for your child to go out and do some squirrel hunting or some rabbit. Great choice there. Now we have another really common scenario. We have a lot of folks that maybe have purchased that defensive carbine for the first time and they're trying to figure out what scope to put on top. I think that's one of the other reasons why people really do look toward those low power variable optics like we have here with the Falcon S8i and the US Optics TS8X, or they have the 6X. Both of these are kind of a smaller package, as you can see. They're not set up to have a whole lot of snags. They're not very large overall, and they are relatively lightweight. So this is something that you can pretty easily put on top of one of those rifles and be ready for flexible distances, all the way from kind of touching distance out to, I'd put these capable of making hits out to 400 yards if you're paying attention, and beyond. I've actually taken this one out to 600 yards, and it works. It's not really set up for anything much beyond that. Those are pretty extreme distances, even for a kind of a mid to large target. But yeah, these are very handy, and I've used these in the prone, offhand. They both work really well, and I don't really feel the weight that's going into them. It's not all that significant. And part of that, as you'll notice, part of the reason why that weight is so low is, I mean, look at the size of the objective there. The lens on this end can get really heavy, like on that US Optics, the Horus here, the Falcon. Yeah, these are ones that are going to really start to step up that weight because we do have such a big piece of glass hanging out at the end. Along with weight, consider the balance of your rifle. On a rifle like this one, I want my center of gravity to be pretty much right here at the front of the action, maybe even just a little bit farther back toward the front of the magazine. That's going to make this a rifle that's easier to hold in an offhand position for a longer amount of time. It's also going to be pretty easy to swing through a target. It may not be quite as steady as a heavier rifle in swinging through a target, or quite as steady when it comes time to take that shot. It might have just a little bit more vibration in it, but overall it's just going to be a whole lot easier to use, easier to get up into the shoulder, and just easier to hold before you have to take that shot. And to fix some of that balance issue, I've incorporated a stock like you see here, the Boyd Spike Camp. If I can get something that isn't just an empty piece of plastic here at the back, then I can start to fix a lot of that balance. And actually in some cases, because of that, I can take a heavier scope up top and it's not going to mess things up. Now, as you can see with this one, the weight is going to be distributed pretty well right over the action. So as long as my rifle has good balance already, the scope shouldn't mess it up too much. Think about your own rifle and its setup before you decide what scope you want to put on top and where that scope might sit. And again, think about that defensive carbine, for example. A lot of the ARs out there, unless they have a pretty thin barrel, it has pretty much all of its weight pretty far forward. You have the steel barrel, and then everything behind that is usually going to be aluminum, and then maybe as it gets toward your buttstock, it's going to be plastic. You may be able to help correct your balance just a little bit by actually adding a scope out over the action, and then maybe by adding a stock that has just a little bit of weight on the backside. It's all kind of dependent on what sort of weight you want to carry. What's the most important thing, actually getting it into action or it having the right balance when it comes time to take the shot. It's a tricky one, and I'm not going to try to guess it for you. For example, I have two AR-15s that are chambered for the same thing, 223 Remington, and they each behave pretty differently out in the field. One of them is much more barrel heavy because it has that H-bar, the heavy barrel, so it's kind of thick under the handguard, then it tapers down, and some of the parts on there are also a little on the heavy side out front. And I know that in a hunting scenario, I've taken out my other one, that kind of scout AR, as I called it, with its lightweight barrel and very lightweight handguard, and that one has a much better balance, and it's easier to get into the field in the first place. And I know which one that I'm going to prefer to take out hunting in the future. All right, enough of that. Let's get back to talking about scopes again. In addition to weight, we do have some other considerations, like all the other dimensions. Some of these scopes are going to be longer than others, as you can see. So for example, the Nikon FX1000 and the Falcon S8i, you can see that there's a big difference in the length of those two. And if you get into some of these higher magnification scopes especially, they can really start getting up there. Let's see, this one is that Mueller 8.5 to 25, 1-inch tube on that guy, and it just looks long and lanky, and it really is. So length can be something that it could start to get into the weight issue and get into where your balance is, but it can be something that's kind of a snag issue or have difficulty fitting into a case. You might think about that. If you have a specific case or scabbard that you might be carrying a rifle around in, some of these scopes might not fit in there. You might want to test that beforehand. But yeah, with some of the really large objective bells that we have here, this can catch on all kinds of stuff, and this can be a little uncomfortable to carry out in the field. This will knock against all kinds of stuff, and as you can see, we also have some very large turrets sticking out on this scope, on the sides and on the top. Those are all snag issues. If you want to be carrying a whole lot of gear, like say some of you guys that have a load-bearing vest, straps, all kinds of things knock in there. This is just one more interaction that you might have to deal with. It depends on your scenario, what you want to trade off, what you want to have. And then you might have some other items attached to your scope, like throw levers, that are also going to add an extra snag point. Thankfully, most of these can fold down. Some of these are fixed, but this one's a folder right here, and it's not going to cause a big issue. But just little things like that are things to be watching for, especially if you do have things hanging off you. We've talked about the ocular bell and its interaction with the barrel right here. In a lot of cases, if I want to be able to get my right eye position behind a rifle like this one, a bolt action, that in many cases is going to have kind of a lower stock here, it's going to have a lower comb, then, if I get this as low as my eye wants it to be, I might actually be knocking the bell of this scope against the barrel. I do want that to be as small a gap as possible, and still maintain my my lens cover right here. But sometimes we can get into some interactions there. So you might actually choose the size of your objective based on how low you can get this. If you think you can get away with the light transmission and all that other stuff that we talked about in previous videos, then yeah, you might want to go with something a little bit smaller so you can get it a little bit lower down. Otherwise, in this case, I can build up the stock on the back end here and be able to see through everything okay. But there is one other end of this scope we need to be keeping an eye on, and its obstructions. And that's the ocular right here. Sometimes we can have the zoom ring, for example, touching the base back here. In this case, I have set this up so that it's just barely missing. If I had my perfect eye relief, I would actually, I think, have this scope just even more slightly forward, and that zoom ring would actually be touching the base. I'd have to either shave the base down or, I don't know, do something to fix that. But as it is, I left it in a pretty good position. The eye relief is okay. It's just on the edge of being perfect, and we don't have an interaction there. But then we also have the bolt. Be thinking about this. If you have a giant ocular bell over here and you have a 90-degree throw on your bolt, you might be knocking against some things. In the case of this one, everything is clear, but I actually have had some scopes where I've started to scrape. I think the Mueller, at one point, I started to scrape with my telekinesis rifle, and I had to change which rings I was using. I had to bring it up just a tiny little bit. This one clears. If I had a different lens cover back here, or if this was twisted off so that this button was in the way, I might actually be striking it. That's one of the cool things, though, about the A bolt or the X bolt. Those have a 60-degree throw. That's the Browning and the Winchester. Those have a 60-degree bolt, and so your chances of actually interacting with that ocular bell are really, really low. Unfortunately, a lot of this is trial and error. You won't actually find out until you get your rifle all set up. But if you can, go ahead and take some measurements. You might figure out what the height of this plane on your barrel is relative to the bore line to see how much space you have. You might take a look at the height of your base and the length of it, and from there you might be able to figure out what sort of ring height that you can deal with. In my case, I actually can't really deal with rings lower than this on this particular rifle setup because of that ocular bell. It's actually kind of a funny problem to have with a much better eye relief than you normally get on most scopes. This one has to be just a little further forward than some of the others. This works fine, like I said, but in an optimal world, yeah, I'd actually have this just a little bit lower. Thanks a lot for watching, you guys. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell down there. We have just a few videos left in this series, and one of them that I think you guys are going to be really excited about is how to look at two different scopes at your store and be able to figure out which one might have some of your better optical qualities. I have some tricks that I can send your way so you can figure out which one you should actually take home with you. But thanks a lot to folks that make videos like these possible. Thank you, patrons of the Destructive Arts. If anybody wants to join them and pitch in $1 or $2 a month to help keep videos like these coming, keep me in rings, and keep the lights on, keep the cameras rolling, I'll put a link to Patreon. But at the 338 Lapua Magnum level, we have Sportsman's Guide, Stan and Mary, and Tyler. And then at the 300 Win Mag level, we have Howard, Joseph Davis, Peter, and Mr. No Name. And like I said, we have a gob of other folks that are pitching in $1 or $2 a month because they like this sort of content and its applicability, its practicality. If you'd like to be one of those, please join us, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. Even if you didn't like this particular content, go ahead and subscribe. There's probably something coming that's more up your alley. Check out this playlist right here. This is going to have videos in a similar vein to what you just watched. These 2 videos we cherry-picked for you. And finally, the Social Regressive is on Patreon. So you can become a patron of the Destructive Arts and earn some goodies while helping us to provide high-quality videos just by kicking us a few bucks a month. Thanks a bunch for your patronage.